I think, no, did we meet you yesterday?
Yep.
Yeah, she was over there.
Okay.
I kept quiet.
Oh, that's why.
She was in the the big 6 o'clock meeting.
She's a board member, Chamber for Main Street Board.
Yeah.
Jermaine kept kicking me under the table because every time I tried to say, no, I'm just kidding. I didn't say anything.
Well, I don't think we need to do introductions or anything then. Glad you could make it back. Yesterday was certainly jammed. A lot of good input, had a chance to just want to say thank you to all of you that took time out of your busy process. With that, Ben.
My turn. Okay. Well, echo that. Thank you for your participation. And Jermaine, thank you for putting yesterday together. I mean, it was very, very well attended meetings, which always helps. I'm going to do my best to go through this pretty quickly. And I feel like we've got a good amount to show you for considering we.
So I should just share. I don't know if Jermaine told you. I'm going to have to leave. I'm sorry.
No problem. No problem.
So when I have to leave, I'll just leave.
Obviously, it's not a huge group, so we're going to keep it.
Nothing you say. I mean, if you say something shocking and I walk out the door, it's not really.
Gotcha. Okay, good. That's good to know. That's good to know. You know, I always like to recap a little bit about what we heard. Overwhelmingly positive yesterday. Obviously, a couple issues that we delved on and maybe sat on for a while and talked about specific issues. But, you know, you are a community. And I have found that whenever more than two people live in the same place, there's not always complete and total agreement on things. So there wasn't anything yesterday that was particularly shocking or made me step back and go, whoa, what in the world's going on here? In fact, I think the overwhelming majority of people talking about the positive momentum, the being able to string together a list of different successes and projects that are in line that are going to happen. Those are all really good things for a community to have. Sometimes you have to really get that proven track record down before you can figure out how to tell your story. Because if you don't have a proven track record of success, you can put together these messages, but if your own citizens don't really believe it and there's no positivity there, then the message you try to project falls a little flat, because the moment that somebody comes into the community and they talk to a resident and they're like, why in the world did you come to Osceola? You know, it defeats that purpose. But it seems to be a really nice level of pride here in the community. Jay, anything else that particularly stuck out? Again, you know,
I would say, and I think you mentioned it yesterday, and it goes back several years before I were here, but there just seems to be this positive kind of vibe here, and not that we would necessarily be able to put our finger on any single thing, but you know, as we had a chance to meet with the 3 different groups, and we probably talked with 50, 60 throughout the course of the day. I think there is this share on the upswing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Momentum is behind us right now, so being able to build on that, use that as a springboard and build on that is pretty exciting for us.
True, and I will say on a more critical note, though, it is obvious that this community has not had self-promotion at the forefront of its mindset. And there are quite a few things that we've seen that kind of fall into that. Every single opportunity there was to get another organization or entity in the forefront instead of the community itself, it was taken. I think I saw no less than 60 different benches yesterday that, you know, were promoting all kinds of organizations and so, you know, sponsorship opportunities. I mean, we heard people talk about the airport, and guess what? The airport's not called Osceola Airport. So,
What is it called? It's called
L.O. Simonstead.
yeah. So
Sorry to the Simonstead. That's an ugly name.
Well, and the trail, the Simonstead Trail too, and we're trying to shift that.
Right. So I think the big thing that you really want to, and again, you don't want to get too critical of that particular mindset, but there is a detriment to this mindset of always passing the credit on to whatever the next level might be. So if you're going through in a community is really participating in funding processes, but then there's always this mindset of this kind of shifting of credit to the financial supporter instead of keeping some of that credit on the community level because the community is the one that's organizing it. The community is not always benefiting from those. So just be real mindful in terms of the way that you connect the dots and take those opportunities to put your name on things because that does go a long way.
For example, could you give us
Of things that have names that don't need names?
well, no, just how that process would work.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, well, first of all, just the realigning the expectation of what occurs when financial support is given. Um, if you are sponsoring an event, that is a dramatically different relationship than if you are investing in a park. So, if you invest in a park, you are contributing to something that gives back long term to your community. And therefore, your payout should be far less marketing oriented. You shouldn't feel like your name and your sign should go in every single location. Where if you're investing in sponsorship in an event, that is a very marketing oriented decision. And that is exposure to potential customers is part of the trade off there in sponsorship. So I want to introduce the idea that there's a difference between support in your event series versus the physical place itself. Just because you're cleaning up the community, you're putting a garden in, you're doing, park amenities, you're doing all this kind of stuff. If every single thing gets branded from the donor, then the community really it's too much of a canvas for marketing. It becomes much more difficult for people to see and realize that this is a community that values caring for itself and beautification, if that makes sense. I mean, I always like the idea of organizations that host a series of events offering out year-long sponsorship packages, trying to minimize the number of asks that these major corporate community sponsors have. And I think that's part of the reason what we do is we have no forethought in sponsorships. So we're constantly going out and hitting people up for every single idea we have. And therefore, an event sponsorship feels exactly the same as funding for physical things. But we want to start separating those out. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. Now, what we saw, and this is from a physical standpoint and looking throughout the community, obviously, if we kind of go back through the process, I worked with the community 10 years ago in 2007. We introduced the idea of branding here and having kind of a cohesive message. It took about 3 years after that before the community went through and engaged with a firm out of Menominee to design this logo. So this was done in 2010. And did anybody here play a part in this process? Okay. I'm going to be critical, but I'm going to be critical in a way that this is a really good start because it's professionally designed. But one of the keys to community branding is creating a true foundation for communication, not a logo. If your idea is a singular logo, you're falling short on the idea of community branding. You get this product, but then all of a sudden you still have the chamber organization. So what did the chamber do? The chamber attempted to create an adaptation of that. Now, from a design standpoint, there's some interesting things that happen. Okay, can you tell that the name itself and the entire graphic on the inside, it got stretched out wide? Well, that's because Area Chamber of Commerce is huge. So, it's like we kind of end up stretching that out a little bit, and then we drop and Main Street Community. And this is not brand extension. This is attempting to take what was designed as a singular graphic and make it work for multiple purposes. Really good, like it was motivated by the right intentions, but it's because the tool you started off with didn't have all the elements. So what I want to do is I want to start back here, and I'm going to walk you through kind of a design nerd process of deconstructing this. Okay. Again, this was done 7 years ago, so design changes. Just the clothes that you bought 7 years ago might not be the trendiest clothes you have in your closet anymore. So there's some things that we want to change about this. First of all, the distress in the background. The funniest thing that I saw was a photo of the old gateway sign down there close to the airport, and then a rendering of replacing it with this. Well, if you remember the old gateway sign, it actually looked like this in reality, And it's kind of like, why are you going to replace an old sign that looks dilapidated with a brand new sign that intentionally looks dilapidated? So I think that it's time for us to remove that. The community has actually achieved a polish that you deserve to have that cleanliness. So step one is remove that, and don't worry about trying to have that texture. That's a lot of activity there. Okay, so step two, real, charming, clever, been there, done that, love the periods, love having a simple statement. This message is too flat for this community. You guys have too much story to tell for it to be simplified down to simply being authentic and charming. So we want to give you something that builds in who you are today, but also captures aspirational goals for growth and continued movement of that momentum that the community has. So we're going to politely take that and file it in the circular file. And so then, as we're going, we're starting to clean this thing up a little bit. Now, the next thing is when you start to really dig into this, it literally, like, there's just so much going on in something that should be simple and should have the name. So you want to go through, and you can't really even see it, but even on here and here, there are borders everywhere. Like every single element has multiple variations. So I went through, I removed all the borders, I removed the drop shadows, and you start to simplify it down into a base that you can replicate and use. Okay? So that's kind of where my thinking is leading us. Let's use this graphic base that we have. Let's simplify it down as an evolution so we don't feel compelled to remove or replace anything we've used, but we start to drill back down into that platform. Now, the other thing that we want to focus in on is this differentiation between an organizational identity and a destination brand. So you have this community logo that you've had, and we've looked at how the chamber attempted to create a variation for their organization. But much like universities have athletic logos and academic logos, the community needs to have a separation between the community identity and the organizational identities. So that's what we're going to dig into now, and it's called this destination brand. With the basis of the destination brand, you want to define 4 main elements: your color palette, your typefaces, your consistent message, and your approach to graphics. So with you guys, what I did was I defined a 5-color, and it's a little brighter on the screen. You can kind of see here that it's a little bit more appropriate. It really was, it started with some of the colors that were already being used. I wanted to make sure to get green in there, even though it's not the chieftain's green. I wanted to have something that would tie the families together. A blue that kind of ties in the water and everything, and still having that red and that cream. And then it looks black, but it's actually kind of a charcoal color. So that's going to give us a basic color palette for us to use to connect those dots. Then with the typefaces, I did a kind of robust system here. That primary typeface at the top, that is the typeface that the designer used for Osceola in the original logo.
Is that a custom typeface?
It's not. It's
We were
not.
told it was like we never could find it.
Yeah, it's not. It's called Concorsa, and I've got it, and I'm going to give it to you.
Sweet.
The problem with it is that if you can see, like, look at the crossbar and the H. Look at how kind of funny the P's and the R's are. Some words look really odd in it. So you need to have it and understand that you can use it to connect those dots. I will say this. It was a very thoughtful choice for your name. And on the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. So there is a reason why I did not jettison it. There's definitely a reason why I kept it.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
So if we're not seeing lowercase, does the font only come in uppercase?
Only comes in uppercase. And you can kind of see it's the way that it's designed. It comes in what they call, it's all upper. So when you try to type a lower, it comes as a small caps. Still a capital, but smaller size. Yes, absolutely. Same thing, let's see. That's not true of all these. The tertiary it does have lowercase. So the secondary it's called Burton base, and Burton it's actually very similar in horizontal scaling to your primary. It's going to allow for a lot more extension. And it's just nice and clean, age appropriate for the time period and the design that we're trying to create, but it's just going to be far more versatile to you. The tertiary is called Carton Slab, and Carton Slab serifs are very, very popular now. Slab serifs are a typeface that kind of do a nice job of looking both progressive and traditional at the same time. It's part of the reason they're very trendy now. So I think that it's a good choice for you all, and you'll see how I use that. And then the accent typeface is called Blessed Day. Scripts are very hard to read. They're very difficult to use for kind of external communication. A lot of times communities pick them because they think my community's pretty, so I'm going to pick a pretty typeface. But I like to pick an accent, but you'll see it's used very sparingly. So once you have those defined type families, you go and you solidify what you call a word type. And the word type is really just those letters directly pulled from that original logo. The reason why this typeface was such a nice selection is because most other typefaces, when you have the L and the A next to each other, when you have the E and the O next to each other, you have too many curves next to straight lines. And this typeface does a really nice job of creating a sense of continuity and curvature. And again, I know that sounds like a design nerd kind of thing, but just trust me to know that I looked at other typefaces and none of them felt attractive, easy to read, or appropriate the way that this did. So it was a really good typeface selection for your name. Then we went through and we looked at some of the values, the things that people talked about over and over again. These are not in priority order, but obviously the waterfall, the train, the river itself, the small town feel and all the things that go with the small town feel. That's everything from the interpersonal connectivity of the residents to the relationships with the businesses to the Braves and the parks and the walkability. So all that kind of stuff is all wrapped up in that small town. And then the idea of being able to serve as a base camp so that you can make that pitch from a visitor standpoint of being a place that you can set up and experience the region around you, and then just also leveraging those natural assets and taking advantage of all the different things from the topography to the water to the trails and all those things that you've been working on cultivating. So as I started to tie all those things together, I tried to figure out how can we stitch together this positive momentum that the community has, the huge asset of the river, the water, the outdoor recreation, and then the small town feel. How can we do it in a way that positions our role as a border town? And I think that from a creative standpoint, there were a lot of things that Jay and I came up with as we were just coming up with ideas. But we always had to be very mindful to make sure that the overall message didn't start from a mindset of someone who lives in the Twin Cities, but instead starts here. We know down the road that part of our messaging is going to be marketing to Twin Cities to come here, but we want our primary message to be focused on the people that live here, the people that love it here. So we were inspired by, was it David from Trollhagen? And he had a phrase that he shared, and as we started to dig into it, it really started to gain some traction. So what we landed on was this idea of Osceola, Wisconsin's cool little river town. Now, it's a simple phrase. It allows for expansion. I mean, you can also be St. Croix's cool little river town. You can do a lot of different things. We actually went out and we did some quick research, and we bought you all coollittlerivertown.com because it was available. No one's really positioning themselves this way, not just here, anywhere. And let's break down that phrase. The idea of being cool is something that it means different things to different people, but you definitely always associate coolness with momentum and energy, vibrancy. The idea that you're incorporating little into your identity helps to very much say that we intend to remain small town. And even as we grow, small town is part of our character and small town is part of our aspiration. And then that just the positioning of being a river town, to us, it makes sense. Again, this is what we landed on after a fantastic, 16 hours of deliberation from last night. But I do think that from an overall messaging standpoint, it gives you a lot of room to start to tell these stories from. Now, if I keep jumping ahead, with this simplified system, you can now start to do things that you didn't really have the tools for before. There was a one color black and white version, but even it was still very busy. So having these cleaner, simplified versions, once you have that foundation on the destination brand, you start to look at that organization brand. And what I did was I started out by creating an identity for the village. And the village uses that word type. Does anybody recognize that graphic? Where's it from? Straight off the Cascade Falls signs. I mean, it's a pre-existing graphic. I did a couple things here on purpose. I incorporated an arched element because all the wayfinding signage and a lot of the things that we're starting to see are starting to incorporate that arched top. So graphically, you start to kind of backfill some design continuity in some of the things that already exist. Now, there's a very deliberate reason why, the village they're the ones that have elected officials. They're the ones that levy taxes and do codes and all that kind of stuff. Like, the village is not always the good guy. So being able to have a graphic identity that is complementary but also still separate, it creates enough buffer there to be able to protect the difference between that destination brand and those community organizations. Does that make sense? So then from there, using that same philosophy, and chambers are funny, so I'll you know how this goes. Chambers exercise this really interesting, what I call naming diplomacy, where their names keep getting longer and longer and longer in an effort to expand their reach in their area. So, it's like, you're not the Osceola Chamber, you're the Osceola Area Chamber of Commerce and Main Street Community. So it's just like, your business card has to accordion fold. So when I design logos, a lot of times there's this weird misconception that your logo has to be your formal legal name when logos are graphic tools to help you communicate. So what I did was I just designed a logo for the Osceola Chamber Main Street. And if you see, it's got a couple interesting elements in there. We designed this stylized version of the waterfall that's made up of 4 elements, kind of ties into the whole 4-point approach to Main Street and all that kind of stuff. But this way, it gives you an opportunity to strongly tie in, but it's kind of your badge of, this is the things that we're in charge of. This is what we're doing. This is your return on investment for your membership and your involvement in the organization. So once you start to see those tools emerge, you start to see that the community starts to now have this system where you have these organizational identities and then that destination brand. Does that make sense? So then from there, you start to dig into brand extension. And the brand extension is where it starts to grow legs and it starts to run, and you start to tie together a lot of these concepts into things that make it graphically and visually easy for people to connect the dots. So one of the first things we heard about yesterday morning was the power of 10. Really easy kind of way for the community to talk about some of their priorities. So simply using some of that typeface to connect that stuff in is a simple thing to roll that and make it part of the story. I always like to look at high school, because the high school is normally such a birthplace of pride in a community. So, you can just see where you can take simple ways to connect some of those things together. We talked about the airport, and again, like I say, I know this isn't the official name, but as you market it and tell the story of the airport, it is good to have the community own that. Now, Rivertown Trails. Rivertown Trails Coalition has been doing a lot of really good work at connecting physically the place. But again, with that, you want to have something that makes it very easy for people to realize that there's a network of connections. So what I did was I did a very simplified version. I don't necessarily think that those always need graphics. So this really is just kind of a word type that ties that in together. The reason why this approach is nice is you could adopt this approach, and because it does not have an alternative graphic, it shouldn't make anybody feel like they need to replace anything that's already been done. So it can simply just be an evolution into the way that you connect that in. And then again, by bringing in that uniform word type, it almost makes the whole effort and initiative even more official. Like you got that stamp of approval. One of the coolest events or activities that you all do that I learned about on the website and didn't hear anybody talk about was the dock walk. And that's really cool. I don't think I've ever heard of any other community that's done that before. I love that idea, and being able to tie that in is something that's really important. And then, even fun events like, Light Up Osceola, I went and played around, and this is a little bit of a departure, but like once you do the Discovery Center, always playing up that idea of using colors and using typeface, but being able to create enough of a separation that things preserve their own unique identities. And then in that same vein, things like Fab Lab. So you can see, you're starting to see the typeface and the colors used in a lot of different ways. And you start to create a pretty broad spectrum, but they're all building from that same base. Any questions so far? Make sense? Okay. Now with signage, I didn't want to talk a lot about wayfinding because you guys are rolling that out. And I mean, I'm not sure in the 15 years that I've done this that there's ever been a community that deserves the more bang for your buck award than what you've pulled off here in Osceola. So, you know, not a lot of reason to comment on that. I think the community understands. I think you all know there's some more signs that still need to go out there. You've got the foundation of the big trailblazers in place, and then just keep moving forward with that. You probably are getting close to time to introduce some new banners. So I wanted to show how with those new banners, being able to have something that the banners that you have are very attractive. And I don't really have any individual critique on them, but you can tell that they're designed based off of a white screen, and they end up adding a lot of activity to the community. Being able to have something that's a little bit calmer, that when you look down, it creates some continuity running down the corridor. I think that's going to be important. And I will say, as we toured around the community and as we talked with folks, there was one issue that we heard that I feel like it's probably makes sense for me to comment on. And that was the discussion that revolved around a roundabout right there in front of Dairy Queen. And there's definitely a correlation between the role that street banners play and the role that traffic configuration has. But I feel like it's important to say out loud, roundabouts have not really ever shown to be pedestrian friendly. Any time that you have a traffic device whose intention is to never have a car stop, cars not stopping don't tend to be particularly conducive to pedestrians wanting to cross a street.
Can you write that up for us so we can submit it to the state of Wisconsin? So,
Have you ever heard of anyone being able to stop that?
I mean, yeah, I can't give you an example in Wisconsin per se, but I mean, you've got a rail depot on the other side of that traffic circle. For the economic viability and vitality of the future of your downtown, being able to assure long-standing pedestrian connections between those two. Now, I mean, we could talk for the rest of the afternoon about the relationship and the dynamics between traffic engineering and downtown redevelopment. You know, oftentimes traffic engineers are tasked with efficiency. And there is no doubt that traffic circles produce an efficiency in traffic flow because they remove stoppage. But that doesn't mean that enhanced efficiency is always what our downtowns need. A little bit of stopping can be really good for vibrancy. So,
You wouldn't even look, if you were going through that, you wouldn't even look downtown.
right,
Right now, you look.
right, right.
A lot of people that, head out either to Wheels and Wings or to the train,
Mm-hmm.
we're even talking now about how do we get them to turn their head and look down.
Right.
If they
Well,
don't have it.
and all that to say, banners can be used very strategically to create visual density, continuity, help people to understand where your downtown starts and stops. In key intersections, the presence of banners running down one direction and not running down the other direction help to put a visual weight. So, as a perfect example, I would actually argue that right now, if I'm stopped right next to the gas station and Dairy Queen's directly ahead of me, I want to see banners to my left. I don't want to see banners to my right. And on the other side of the bridge, that you don't you go under a bridge right there, don't you? Yeah. On the other side of the bridge, the banners can pick back up, so that you've got an entry corridor from that direction, but you give just enough of a visual gap that it looks busy this way and not busy that way. Those are the kind of strategic cues, and I think a lot of times we put banners up because every other downtown has banners, and we don't think about the strategy that they can help us with. So, and then the other thing with those two is being able to use banners to talk about events, to be able to promote different destinations and tell people a little about the community. I think all that kind of ties in together.
So you mean, for example, what about destinations? Like, how would that look?
Like, let's say that you had, I'm trying to think about a couple of the different,
I mean, would you put something up
The-
there like Trollhagen or the Drake?
not as much that. You could, no, probably not as much that. What I mean more is, let's say that we're going to have a parking lot behind the Discovery Center. And we know that that parking lot is going to be the place where people who are coming in, they're going to leave their cars. We might decide to have a series of banners around the parking lot that promote Cascade Falls. So when they're one place, you use banners to let them know about another place. Or it might be that you have a series of banners over at the depot that talk about historic downtown. So that you use the banners to say, if this is all you've seen, you haven't seen it all. If that makes sense. We worked in Stanton, Virginia, and they had the Woodrow Wilson Presidential Library, and they also had the American Shakespeare Theater. So we designed these banners for each of those, and they made this assumption that the Woodrow Wilson banner should go at Woodrow Wilson and the Shakespeare should go at Shakespeare. It's like, no, you switch them. Because if they're at Woodrow Wilson, they know where Woodrow Wilson is. So just think about it that way from kind of a storytelling aspect. Then moving into collateral, as we were sitting over there at Dick's at Caribou Coffee, a Village truck pulled up, so I thought it might be nice to kind of just show graphics there.
You'd love that back end there.
Yeah, just doing things that are kind of nice. That's kind of an interesting texture to tie it in. Being able to make that community brand, and again, this is where that difference between the destination identity and the organizational identities really comes into play. The destination brand should be something that the business community, both public and private sector, have full access at, so that businesses in your community can profit from this identity and this relationship that people have with place. So whether you're doing t-shirts, whether you're doing hats, I always like to show these because I'll never forget the day that my 13-year-old daughter came home and asked for a Swell bottle, and I was like, what in the world is a Swell bottle? And she's like, well, it's a water bottle. I'm like, okay, why are you acting like this is such a big deal? And then I found out that it was like a $45 water bottle, which apparently it's filled with tiny fairies that keep your drink cold all day long. I have no clue. It's magic. But I like to do these as an example of a concept that we call brand co-oping. When you have an established premium brand that has a brand following, putting your community's brand alongside that premium brand transfers the quality that brand has onto your place. So we heard a lot of talk about outdoor recreation. That being said, you probably ought to think about the idea of doing a very small number of premium outdoor type wearables where you're putting that Osceola logo right next to Patagonia logo. So people start to use that brand co-oping to help position the community for that base camp mentality. So it's called brand co-oping. It's a really, really good thing to do. And then got a couple more things real quick. Jermaine had asked about shopping and dining guide, being able to have a way to kind of tell that story. So I wanted to just design a quick cover for that. And again, you can see like everybody else just calls it a shopping and dining guide. So take that opportunity to kind of take it and make it yours. And then just
Can I just go back? Why
absolutely.
do you put the year on there? Is there a reason?
Yes, because they're out of date the moment you print them.
Yep.
So I put the date on there to go ahead and set in your mind that you can't get away with this idea of I'm going to print a huge print run and let them last me 3 years. Because a shopping and dining guide is not valid if the information in it's not good. So I'm glad you asked that question, Jermaine. I put that date on purpose to say if you are going to have a printed piece, you need to understand that it's going to need to be printed on a regular basis. Doesn't have to be annual necessarily, but it has to be regular. It has to be planned, and you cannot be a cheapskate. I cannot tell you how many times I have gone into communities that have 7-year-old shopping and dining guides, and it's just not a place for efficiency. And if you're not interested or you don't have the resources to do a guide that you can keep up to date, you need to think about a different solution that you can. So maybe it's not a printed piece. Maybe it's a different kind of printed piece. Now, we've designed brochures where we'll do full color brochures that have a little bit of non-changing information about the community, and then on the inside they have a map, and then they get a one-color printed insert that has the list of the businesses and a map location by grid. And then that
Do you still need a map? GPS is so. It takes up so much of the real estate on these things.
It does. I mean, we could probably have a pretty valid conversation as to whether or not you need a brochure. But I do think that there's a certain validity in having it in print.
Let me just, because this is, we're in the middle of this right now, so do you put the dining and the shopping together? But we have like 4 spas in town, so this is women thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Do you put those 4 things together or not?
Sure. Actually, with a community your size, because even if we listed every single consumer-oriented business that you have, it's not going to be a gigantic list. I would actually argue that if you adopted an annual print cycle, I think you could get away with no map, a comprehensive event list, and then a business list. And then have it where you go to print in November of every year, and it comes out in January, and it's got the event list for the year, it's got the businesses. And the other thing that I will say, and I have to say this because when chambers are involved, there's always a focus on return on investment and chamber benefit. I am strongly opposed to pay-to-play community guides that do not show the comprehensive list of the businesses available. So, now that doesn't mean that you can't find a way to highlight chamber members or give them some sort of extra credit in there, but if you're not going to show all the stores that people could shop at, you're not going to show all the restaurants that they can dine at simply because they're not chamber members. And I feel like I have that argument a lot with folks.
I don't think you'll find that argument here. I get it.
Yeah.
But quickly though, okay, so in this guide, our downtown businesses, I know that they want to keep it kind of higher end, or they want it to be more boutique-ish. But then you got Bill's Ace,
Mhm.
and you got Federated Co-op Farm Store out there.
Mhm.
So tell me a little bit more how you do that.
I mean, we're only talking about a little line for them. I think
Okay.
you wrap your arms around it,
Or a
and
good, I mean, we could talk for hours about this
Yes,
too,
we
but a good way to incorporate, we have the website, and a good way, I mean, you could have, everybody has their phone with like maps and stuff like that. You could have the little square thing that all you have to do is scan your, what are those? The
QR codes,
QR, yeah, do that, have that inside the brochure, and then that links to the website that says for more information on the map. And then actually on that part, people would have it on their phone saying, here's the map and here's all the
Mhm.
little spots. Plus it incorporates the website and all
Yeah.
that stuff, and it wouldn't take up that much space in like the brochure.
I'll tell you, I mean, when it comes to things like hardware stores, grocery stores, that kind of stuff, I'm not at all opposed to them being in there. It's the professional service. It's the things like accountants and lawyers and check cashing places that it, you never, like, there really is virtually no need for visitors to be notified of that. You know, if we're going to try to position ourselves as a base camp and we're going to start to look at extending the stays, things like hardware stores and grocery stores are very valid
Yeah,
to share.
so-
That's just where I was gonna go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was thinking about that. How do you even take that a little further? That concept of base camp, shopping, dining, base
Mhm.
camp. I mean, I get the cool little guide, but I was trying to think of that last night too, just how to found more on that in the
Right.
shopping dining world.
Right, and it's like the whole idea of positioning Osceola as the perfect place to see the valley, the perfect place to explore St. Croix. You've got that opportunity. You do have to. You have to recognize that other people are trying to make that argument of extending a stay. We heard that St. Croix Falls and what's the other one? Taylor's Falls are trying to talk about more than a day trip kind of thing. That's fine for them to be telling that story. We probably want to focus in on. I think, especially as we talk about external messaging, there are so many comments, there's so many statements about you never knew far away was so close. You know, like I mean the ways that you can assemble that terminology, that phraseology are nearly endless. And I love you saw a couple places I used that so close. There's something really nice about that simple phrase because it's talks about geography, but it also talks about people and the relationship between people. So,
Do you have that all in your presentation?
yeah, it's in there. It's I put it on I don't remember where it is. It's a banner somewhere, but yeah, we can.
It's popped up at least once already. I don't
Yeah.
remember where it was on.
Yeah, and that's what I always try to do. I try to do a little bit of a brain dump on all the ideas that we have because I want you to be very mindful of the fact that branding is not a single message. It is not a single phrase. It's the right thing at the right time to the right people. And this overall positioning of being the destination, that cool little stop in the St. Croix Valley, that place that you owe it to yourself to explore. While still to the local confirming that we are solidifying these certain values. We want to continue to invest in our community. We want to continue to move our community forward. Yet we want to continue to have small town feel and hometown relationships. And we want to make sure that we always engage in our natural resources and be good stewards of those resources that we have. Does that make sense? Okay. And then from there, I mean, what we've been talking about, just that idea of being able to bring people in, and give them the freedom and the space to really kind of explore what this region has to offer. Because, I mean, you really, you have a ton. And, you know, if you're in that group last night at 6 o'clock and it's like you sit there and you go down that list of all the stuff that this community has now, we could sit there and we could talk about all the stuff we still need to create, but there's a lot here today, right now. Why do more people not know? Well, because we haven't been telling the story. And I feel like this is a story that it's pretty easy to be able to get on board and figure out how to tell. So with that, that's what we were able to do over the past, since 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock last night. I'd love to open it up for your thoughts and kind of gut reactions to the recommendations. Does it help to clarify things? Does it help to make the tools that the community had invested in already seem to connect a little bit better and seem to be more valuable?
I love it.
Great.
Yeah, this is exactly what we needed.
Okay.
I needed help clarify this kind of concept. It was coming together, but not coming together.
Right. And I want to be very, like, I want to say it loud and clear because I don't want you all to be overly critical of yourselves. You did the right things. You invested in what you thought were going to be the right tools. And just take it from me, as a person who does this for a living, I had some difficulty getting my arms around the appropriate way to break down what you had and then build it into a system that you could actually take and run with. And there were just some design decisions that were made that what they did was they positioned a single logo at far more importance than a system. So being able to deconstruct it, define the components that make the system up, and then rebuild it so you can show how it can grow and expand and tie into the different tools. I think that it gives you the things that you need without feeling like you're having to backslide or redo any of the work you've done.
How do we work together with, like, I mean, if we decide to obviously change the logo and everything like that, work together like with the village to change it so everything flows together and has that nice flow of everything looking the same,
Right.
And
Well,
connecting everybody together, you know what I mean?
yeah.
Flooding the village and everybody else too.
So there's a technical answer to that, and then there's an organizational answer to it, and I want to address both of them because it's a great question. From a technical standpoint, everything that I've done for you all becomes yours. I'm going to create a comprehensive resource kit that has a style guide document. So all those typefaces are defined, all the colors are defined, shows you how to use the logos, how not to use the logos, intended not only for internal guidance, but also for external distribution. All the logos that I created, I will save in 5 different file formats. So there'll be probably 3 formats that Jermaine can use, and then 2 formats that are intended more for professional vendors and things like that. But again, important to have. So from a rolling it out and getting everybody on the same page, you're now going to have a digital toolkit that by sharing a single link, you give access to professional resources to anyone who wants to play along. From an organizational standpoint, and Darren actually, we discussed this earlier, and he's going to make a point to kind of come back as we get the resources back to you from a digital standpoint and help from an organizational standpoint. But we would like for you all to essentially create a brand task force. The brand task force would be made up of, it would be a small group. It's not a new organization. It's literally kind of a rollout team. And it would be made up of members of the chamber, be made up of members of representative from the village, all the major marketers. the hospital system, things like that. So you get the different folks that are telling the Osceola story, and you get them together with these resources that are being made available to them for free, and then being able to use that group to create that energy. And the hope would be that because we can explain and show graphically what it is that we're trying to accomplish and why this connectivity is important. A lot of times we find it just kind of makes sense. It makes sense visually, and therefore that visual kind of common sense solution tends to break down some of the barrier.
Could you say just a little bit more about when you said, so that you share it with everyone,
Mhm.
share it, but for example, right now, we have someone that just took our logo and they've got it on their Facebook page, just an individual.
Okay.
Is that what we're doing? It's just, everybody
I-
takes shares and,
I would say when it comes to the destination brand, yeah.
okay.
The problem is you start to feel like they're treading on your territory if they're taking the chamber logo. And then if all you have from the chamber is a variation of the destination brand, then you feel like, hey, if they put that on there, it's going to look like they're representing the chamber, the chamber's opinion.
Official place of.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
so what you're saying, the destination is just loosely, anybody go for it?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And as scary as that might sound, I have done this enough to tell you that I literally struggle to give any example of where things went awry. And in fact, the only story that really comes to mind of something going the way that it shouldn't was in a community that had trademarked their logo and had closed access to their logo, and someone still stole it off their website, used it as an icon for an app, and tried to peddle an app as an official app for a community. And, it's one of those things where it's like, it doesn't matter what kind of protection you have in place. If someone's going to do that, you're always going to have the same result. You're going to have a lawyer write a nastygram. And, it doesn't...
While we're on the same subject, so we have this, what's it called? When we do the Wheels and Wings, it is registered as our logo and all the, so every year, or every 7 years, I think we have to pay $1,200 to keep it official.
Okay.
Tell me more about that, because that's a chunk of change for us, and like,
Yeah.
do we care that we have it and it's ours, we own it? Or,
There's no reason for you to do that for your community brand.
I get the community, but this is Wheels
Yeah.
and Wings, which is a different
Event brand.
event brand that is,
Uh,
at some point, someone made that decision that it was important to keep paying for this.
I don't think we pay like for the community fair for like our logo.
no.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Sure,
no.
Because it came out of your original stuff, your Osceola Community Fair did.
Did it?
Wheels and Wings, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I mean, we don't
But we just got this renewal, $900.
So,
It's registered, so no one else can take it, but it doesn't.
it depends on how deep you want me to answer that.
And we
It-
are not the Wheels and Wings board anymore, but I think they would listen to your advice.
Yeah, I mean, if I can answer that without weighing into what apparently seems to be kind of a bit of a contentious subject,
Pretty perceptive.
if the event
Not really.
was a huge revenue generating event because there were ticket sales, then
The whole lowdown.
then I would say that the continuation of a trademark makes sense in a region that, I mean, air shows are really big here. They're bigger here than a lot of other regions, and I think Oshkosh kind of plays into kind of setting a tone for that in this kind of mega multiple state region. But if it's continuing in this path of being a smaller, more localized, community-oriented event where participants come for free, and there's a very definite, like, if the organization that's pushing this and the group that's running this event have seen it as a small event and seen it as a huge event and have decided that they want to land somewhere right in the middle and they're comfortable with a 5,000 person festival, I'm not really sure why shelling out a bunch of money to protect the trademark. I mean, what's going to happen? You still have an inherent trademark negotiation. The difference between an inherent trademark negotiation and a registered trademark is simply the documented fact. You still have to prove monetary loss. You're still going to show that by another place taking your name and taking your event. They siphoned off ticket sales. More ticket sales. They don't have any proof. Or they misled vendors. So they took vendor revenue by trying to be, so I guess I would probably lean towards letting it go. Sure. Worth the cost of admission. Yeah. So, any other questions about the overarching marketing?
In your information that follows through of who got after everything's put in place, because you're gonna have this, whatever you call it, the village brand, and then you're gonna have all those other brands off of that. Well, what's to keep people from, creating that, but not using something similar, but distorting the brand, which would then distort the brand in the village?
Right. So, okay, so two questions. First of all, the report that I'm going to give is not going to specifically outline the task force creation. That'll come directly from Darren, who's going to come back and help to set that up one-on-one. So it's actually more proactive a solution than me outlining, because he knows the community better, and he knows better with you all who should be on there and who shouldn't be on there. In terms of I've actually found that, well, the hidden question in there is Chamber Main Street is the owner of this because the service was provided to you all. So at the end of the day, the destination brand and the chamber, that stuff is owned by you all. You have all the right in the world, and I would hope that it would go this way, that if the village were to adopt it and decide that they did want to use that village identity, that it would be a gift to the village and it would be theirs to own and use and do what they want with. And there's nothing preventing that from our standpoint, that transference of ownership. The thing that we've really found is by giving free and open access to the professional resources, we find the highest level of professional reproduction. The worst thing in the world is trying to control, and by trying to control and assure consistency, when you introduce roadblocks to access, you end up promote people trying to recreate things on their own. And you end up getting brand dilution because people see the momentum, but then don't have access, so they want to just create their own and get kind of close. We see that all the time if you go to Walmart and you look at the local-oriented shirts that, for high schools and stuff like that. It's kind of weird how different things end up on different variations of different stuff. So we've actually found that one of the best ways to assure brand consistency is simply through openness and being able to freely and willingly share. For some reason, people are always scared that a strip club is going to take it and use it.
That's where my
Yeah,
mind went.
and I can tell you that in all of my career, never has my work inspired a strip club. The best I can get close to is there was in one community in South Carolina, there was an OBGYN office. So that's the closest that I've got. So, you know, it's just doesn't really work that way, I don't think. I think it's just one of those things where people, it's just kind of the nature of what you're doing. And I think the adoption on the outset of rolling it out that we want people to profit from this. If a downtown business makes money off of people wanting to buy Osceola merchandise, in my mind, that is good for every facet of Osceola. And, you know, one thing I didn't talk about specifically that you asked in your email was, is there any need in Osceola to have a downtown variant? You asked if does downtown need its own logo. Osceola is simply too small a community to need a downtown variant. Just doesn't make sense. It would add extra complication for no reason. So the reason I didn't show anything, and I wanted to make sure I addressed it because I knew you asked it. It's just doesn't make sense here. So, any other questions for Jay or I?
I'm just gonna go back to the trails one, cause it,
Yep.
you know, you have a group of people that love their logo and all that stuff, but,
And can I tell you, I did something very deliberately there. Okay, I did a logo for Rivertown Trails.
yeah,
I did not do a logo suggestion for the Rivertown Trails Coalition.
oh, okay,
And my recommendation would be to use the current logo that they've created
okay, for the
to become the coalition logo, and then simply introduce
there you
this
go.
as more of an amenity icon.
Okay,
Because then you could use the exact same, you could almost use the exact same style format and do one for parks.
that was my next question.
Yep. Yep. And then that way you create continuity between the assets.
So like the word trail replaced with.
Parks. Yep.
Something simple.
Yep.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Mhm.
See, I do actually think about this every now and then. Yeah, I could tell because of the way that Trails logo, I could just tell that a lot of thought and discussion had gone into it, and I thought that using it for the coalition made a ton of sense, but then moving forward for the goal of connecting assets back to the community and in a visitor and local's mind, having something more consistent with the destination brand made sense too.
And it's similar, we have kind of this group called Grow Osceola, it's our
Mhm.
volunteer group, probably similarly.
Yeah.
Where they keep their, yeah, okay.
All right, y'all. Well, thank you so
I'm
much.
curious what these guys thought,
Yeah.
about
I
this whole
love it.
thing, you guys.
I love, like, just simple, clean,
Mhm.
that's what I like. So, like, the other logo, now that you're pointing out all these things, kind of gave me anxiety.
Yeah.
Looking at it, I'm like, there's so much going on.
Right.
Yeah, I love this.
Or like you said, it was like old school, kind of like you
Yeah.
had that feel of just, I mean, I'll be honest too, it's like blah. And like this is a
Right.
fresh, like, it's a fresh, new, exciting, I don't know.
Without a complete
Organized,
departure, like it's
organized, like it gave me anxiety too, just looking at it, or every time you see it,
Yeah.
then it's like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, or driving by and seeing the thing and being like, real charming. I mean, like, obviously it was cute then.
Mhm.
I mean, now it's like the next step. In 10 years, we'll probably need to look
It-
at like a bigger picture.
Exactly.
And, like,
When do you
whatnot,
refresh, when do
you
you
know?
come back and circle around?
you know, there's no fixed rule with that. I've got some communities that have been using the same thing for 12 years. I've got some communities that need to go back and refresh after 3. General rule of thumb is I say every 5 years, gather the wagons back together. You know, we talked about that branding task force. I do not intend that branding task force becomes a new organization and a new ongoing monthly meeting. Like, that's the last thing these people need. But I have communities that created these brand task force for rollout, and then what they do is they reconvene once a year. very brief time to gather the wagons. Hey guys, this is what we're planning to do from a marketing standpoint this year. Oh, cool. Well, we're doing this. And then if you have that dialogue on a regular basis, and annually is a regular basis, then you can kind of keep that stuff fresh. Sometimes we'll need graphic refreshes. Sometimes we'll need the introduction of an evolved campaign. Here, I think you need to go out and you need to shore up that local population in year one. You need to reinvigorate the community pride, turn the momentum that you have into palpable energy in the citizens. Hopefully that will also fuel some additional citizen re-engagement and volunteering and getting involved in groups. And then once you start to do that, once you start to see things like people go online with Airbnb and have additional products go on for accommodations and stuff like that, then you start to see a readiness to be able to proactively hit the Twin Cities market, because you're getting people here already without that effort. So you don't want to expend a lot of effort to bring a whole bunch of folks in if once they get here, stores aren't open for them and the experience isn't there for them to have. So.
Ricky, how about you? What do you think?
I like that we got the blue and the green in there finally.
Good.
Not just
Yeah.
orange.
Yeah, I could imagine that it would, in a community that is so strongly green with the Chieftains and the Braves, I can imagine that the pure kind of red and cream of everything probably felt a bit odd. Now, I will say there's a reason why I didn't shift it to the only green. There's so much green in the landscape, so much green in the place that
It's
if
so clean.
right. So good. I'm glad you picked up on that, because that was a strategic decision to roll that in.
Well, yeah, and just a little bit I know about branding and what I've seen from other companies.
Mhm.
I guess the premier one is they switched over their brand. They very systematically started here and had here, but had so many different transitions that people would recognize the little things,
Mm-hmm.
but then over a period of time get used to that till the end point, and they never lost any engagement
Right.
from any of their customers. Whereas if they'd have gone from here to here without any of those steps in between,
Yep.
they'd have gone, we're Deluxe Check Co.
Absolutely.
The company that made Deluxe Check.
Yeah.
So I think that task force that's looking at the green, maybe
Mm.
that's where we need to be, and the red will be a secondary type color later on.
I have a question, it has more to do with what Pat was talking about. So, we're trying to get more volunteer leaders and so on, so our events. So we've got we got Dough on the Go, and then we also have Lady Spring Fling. Okay, so some of the Sun was doing some of the, new logo for Lady Spring Fling, and I turned around pretty soon, there's stilettos, and it's not us. It's just like, who wears stilettos around here?
This would be a good reboot for some of those things, so
Mhm.
we kind of strayed.
Right, but help me understand how you do the event with this kind of thing.
Well-
With colors again, or?
Okay, so with the event extension, the great thing about having a branding foundation and a branding toolkit is you can use 1, 2, 3, 4 different parts of that system. So it's okay. Let's say, okay, here's a perfect example. Orange and black are not in your brand system for your primary colors. If the community wants to do a Halloween event and the colors of Halloween are orange and black, you should never feel like you can't incorporate orange and black in a Halloween event because they're not your brand colors. That's silly. So in that circumstance, you can tie in an approach to graphics or typeface, but then feel comfortable not using color. You don't want everything to look so much alike that it's almost like you strip the individual personality out of the events. But you do want to I always tell people that find at least one, like find one thread. And a single thread can tie in, even if it is just a tip to the hat. That Wings and Wheels logo in the kind of triangle wing underneath it it uses the typeface. So, you know, I didn't change that on purpose. It was designed by the same folks, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it looked like it was designed at the same time, and it's like,
I would
so,
love to have something still for like the community fair too, because to tie that together for, you know what I mean, like.
yeah.
Yeah.
So you do it, I went to the
Yeah.
website for Community Fair.
If we're, yeah.
I can do something
If
for that.
we're like
That would be
linking
good,
it all
cause you guys
together.
are really, yeah, cause
Yeah.
you've got that, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's scripty. Yeah. Yeah, I'll do something for Community Fair. It's like this, you know.
Talking with your hands.
Yeah.